Okay, let's start. Thanks everyone for joining us at the Basalt Regional Library. This is Kathy Click, and it's spring, so we are back in touch with our CSU Extension person from Eagle County, Denyse Schrenker. And Denyse is going to start talking to us this month about planting our kitchen gardens. So it's my pleasure to introduce Denyse. We're obviously not yet at the garden since there's about 8 inches of snow out here, so take notes. All right, thanks Denyse. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kathy. Yes, today we're going to be talking about how to choose what vegetables will be best to grow in your garden. And then next week, we'll be talking about starting seeds indoors. So I am going to open up my presentation and start sharing this. Okay. Are you looking at my screen now?
Sure are.
Okay, perfect. Nope, didn't start at the beginning. Okay, yeah, so let me know if anything goes wonky on my end and I'm not sharing my screen anymore. But, oh, like I said, today we'll be talking about how do I choose what to grow. And the first thing, there's cool season and warm season veggies. Cool season veggies are generally easy and reliable, especially if you are at a higher elevation. So the cool season veggies include leafy greens. So examples of those would be Swiss chard, of course, lettuces, spinaches, but also things like endive, collards, cabbage, kale, all of those leafy greens. Those are all going to be pretty easy and reliable in the mountains. And then also for cool season veggies, that includes root vegetables. So you've got your carrots, radish, this guy down here, potatoes, leeks, beets, and then some fun things like kohlrabi and rutabaga. Yeah. And peas are also cool season veggie. So snow peas, snap peas, those guys are going to be pretty reliable every year, as well as a lot of things in the mustard family like broccoli and cauliflower. Brussels sprouts are also a cool season veggie and do fairly well. Those are one that I have had a little bit of a harder time with in the past. So if you've got minimal space, then that would maybe be one to either skip for the year or try if you have a bigger space and are okay with it maybe not doing as well. And the reason for that is just because they take longer to mature. So I've had a hard time getting them to mature before it frosted too hard. So cool season veggies, these guys are going to be a good place to start, especially if you're new to gardening, and also if you're at some of our higher elevations. And other things also I just wanted to mention real quick. For the leafy greens, when you're looking in your seed catalog, something good to look for there is bolt resistant. I'll either say bolt resistant or resistant to bolting. And then also, I'm talking about cold and mountains, but it's also good to look for varieties that say that they're heat tolerant. These will just be able to go a little bit longer into our summer without starting to bolt and go to seed. And for warm season veggies, ones that are really easy and reliable. You have your summer squashes. And so that includes any of like your yellow squashes or patty pan squashes, and also zucchini. And then snap beans or string beans, those are also very reliable. The one thing with the snap beans, they really don't like to be started in cold soil. So best to start them after June 1st. So, and I'll talk more about that in some of the upcoming classes as well. So ones that can be a little bit more challenging are our tomatoes and peppers. For tomatoes, varieties that are determinate are generally going to be more reliable. So for tomatoes, you have determinate and indeterminate varieties. Determinate varieties tend to set all of their flowers at once. So you have one big crop, and then indeterminate varieties set their flowers and crop over a longer period of time. So sometimes they don't yield as well as the determinate varieties because it frosts or just starts to get too cold before they can really put on a good crop. And peppers, for the peppers, Anaheim peppers and things like shishito peppers, those tend to perform pretty well here. The bell peppers are a little bit more challenging, but a lot of the hot peppers do pretty well. And for the bell peppers, if you do really want to try and grow bell peppers, looking for varieties that are smaller fruited are generally going to be better. And that kind of goes along for all of these warm season veggies. Varieties that are a little bit smaller fruiting are generally going to do better and just be more reliable. For eggplants, eggplants are another one that really like heat. And so they can be a little bit more challenging, but these ones that I say are more challenging, they're a little bit harder to get to reliably produce well every year, but definitely does not mean that it's not possible to grow here. They'll grow here. They're just not quite as reliable. And so on the eggplants, again, looking for varieties that are a little bit smaller, produce a little bit smaller of a fruit, are generally going to be more successful. For winter squashes, those include things like butternuts, acorn squashes, delicata, spaghetti squash. So those, I've grown all of those here in Eagle, and we're a little bit colder than down in Basalt, but I've still grown those successfully. They're just not going to be quite as reliable, but they'll do well. Especially, I've had really good success with delicatas. So if you want to try a winter squash variety, the delicata squash would be a great one to start with. It's not used, you don't see it as much in cooking anymore, but they are delicious. So highly recommend that one. And if you really love butternut squash and want to try that, again, I would suggest going for some of like the baby butternuts. Good. Pumpkins also fall into this category. I've had very good luck though with pumpkins. It's just, if we get an early frost, then they might not produce as well. So under their cucumbers also, same thing with the cucumbers. Some years they're going to be great, and other years they might be a little bit more of a challenge. And then sweet corn would fall under warm season veggies. And this is again one that, depending on the year, you might have a great year, but if it starts to get a little bit cold too early, they might not finish they might not completely mature before it freezes. And then the sweet corn especially, I would say is one that you want to put in a more protected area of your garden where it's not getting as much wind, or or if you have an area that you know tends to be just a little bit warmer, the sweet corn would be a good one to put there. And I have a handout too that goes along with this presentation. So if you don't want to take notes, feel free to go back and reference that. I have all of this information in that handout as well. Yeah, and again with the tomatoes, it's with all these warm seasons, at least these a little bit more challenging ones, it's not that they don't grow here, it's just that they're going to be less reliably good. Like last year, I had a bumper crop of tomatoes. It was great tomatoes for days. The year before, not quite so much. They did not do quite as well the year before, but last year they were fantastic. So definitely still worth growing. They just might not produce reliably every year. So, yeah. So herbs that grow here. Our herbs, we've got some perennial herbs, and then we also have some annual herbs. So our perennial herbs are going to be ones that come back every year in the garden. And so for these, you need to know what plant hardiness zone you're in. So I am going to actually go to this website real quick. I think I've got it up here. All right, and are you still seeing my screen?
Yep, we're still good.
Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
I can.
Perfect. Yeah, so here in Basalt, if you're joining from Basalt, we are in 5B. So it's actually a little bit warmer than up here in Eagle. We're only at 5A here. But so you guys are in 5B. You might even be in a 6, zone 6. Yeah. And so you just read that by looking at what color you are, and then looking at the legend over here to see where you're at. And so these USDA hardiness zone maps, they help you know what perennial plants are going to be able to survive winter where you're at. This doesn't mean that they necessarily will survive winter. It's just that they are able to, at least. I'm gonna go back into the
Hello.
here.
Yes, it is. Hi, Danny. How are you?
All right. So in our perennial herbs, we have ones that are reliably hardy. And so these will survive in down to zone 3 or greater. So in Basalt, these will definitely survive. And you can plant them outside. And so some of these include, you've got your French tarragon, horseradish, valerian root, and chives. Also some mints. And just a note about mint, it can spread very aggressively. So even though it'll survive winter, sometimes that's a good one to still plant in a container, just if you don't want it to be taking over your garden. And then herbs that are not always reliably hardy here. So they're either kind of on the edge, and But here, and so if you're in basalt, most of these are hardy down to zone 5. So they will overwinter in basalt. And so, yeah, when I said not reliably hardy, it means that they will survive winter in a zone 5 or greater, or a protected zone 4. So if you're in these zones, you can go ahead and plant them outside, and they'll survive winter and come back next year. If you're in a zone 4, you can still go ahead and try it outside and mulch it really well. Sometimes that will help things that are maybe right on the edge of their hardiness zone overwinter successfully. Or if you have a bit of a warmer microclimate, like there's some rocks or hardscaping that absorbs heat, you can plant it by that. And that will also kind of help bump up your hardiness zone a little bit. But if you're in a zone 3, then you would want to plant these in a container and bring them indoors for winter. And so some of these herbs that are sort of on the fence, we've got common sage, oregano, German winter thyme, winter savory, lemon balm, salad burnet, lovage, and wild marjoram. And I have most of these growing at our CSU demonstration garden in Eagle. And you know, we're only a zone 5A, and basalt is about a 5B. So those should all overwinter successfully in basalt. And then there's some that are some perennial herbs, that are just not hardy at all, and they won't survive winter in Colorado. And so those you can grow in containers and then bring them indoors for the winter. And so some of those include things like summertime, rosemary, and I have heard some people have been able to overwinter rosemary by mulching it in really well at the in the fall. So you might try it, especially if you're in Carbondale or some of those zone 6s, then you might be able to actually get away with it. But here in Eagle, it unfortunately does not overwinter. And then also some of the sages, like your pineapple sage, generally not hardy in Colorado. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask as we go along. And then we have our annual herbs. So these are herbs that their life cycle is completed within 1 year. And so some of these include things like basil, parsley, cilantro. Then you've also got dill and things like chervil and borage. So these ones you can, most of them you can just go ahead and direct seed in the garden. And so you direct seed those in either late May or early June. So like your parsley and your dill, you can go ahead and just seed it directly into the garden in late May, early June. Basil, generally you want to start that as a transplant. So you can either buy a transplant or start it indoors as a seed. And something I just want to note about cilantro, if you're in a really cold area like zone 3, then you might want to start it indoors as a transplant, but I've generally had better luck starting it outdoors just as a seed. And then also with cilantro, you might have noticed that sometimes it likes to just go to seed really fast. So something that helps with that is giving it a little bit of shade protection. So either shade cloth, or if you just have an area of the garden that naturally gets afternoon shade, that would be a good place for cilantro. And that'll help it from going to seed so quickly. Okay. Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so some things to look for when picking a variety. So when you're looking at, especially when you're looking at the warm season varieties, so tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, your squashes, it's good to look for things that say cold tolerant, reliable in cool weather, bred for earliness, first to market. So those kinds of things are going to be generally do better in cold environments. And so like here on the right, I have this New Girl picture of this New Girl tomato. And in the catalog, it says first early with great flavor. So you're going to look for things like that. First early, early to market. And also, so the other thing you'll look at is the days to harvest. And so here's just an example of a seed here. So 58 days. So generally you want to pick the variety that has the least number of days to harvest. And here, the amount of days that's listed on the seed packet is not going to actually be accurate to when it is going to be ready to harvest. Usually we're about a month behind, 2 weeks to a month behind what it says there. So if you have something, you're like, wow, this was supposed to be done like over a week ago and it doesn't look very close yet. Don't worry, that's normal for here. You can pretty much count on adding at least 2 weeks. So about 14 days on there. And let's see. Oh, I just saw I have a question in the chat. Is there a type of raspberry that grows in the Newcastle area? And do you recommend growing them in a container? So raspberries you can grow outside. On the raspberries, and I can actually bring up, let me get out of the presentation for a second and pull up this site. I'm just going to show you some examples for those. Okay, so for raspberries, you want to look for those ones that say generally mid-season varieties. So like this Nova here. Or this one. The ones, so on the fruits are a little bit different than the vegetables, and you don't necessarily want the very earliest because they're more likely to get frosted from a late spring frost. So the vegetables or the fruits are a little bit different, and you actually want more of a mid-season variety. Those are going to be less likely to get damaged from spring frost. So on the raspberries, look for that like mid to late summer bearing variety.
Amy, I'm sorry, Denyse, can you talk about there's biennial raspberries and annual raspberries, and there's a thing about cutting back the canes with raspberries. Can you go over that real quick?
Yeah, and so that it depends on if it there's Primacane and Novocaine. And on that, it's just you want to make sure you know which one you have, because one of them bears on first year cane, so the very newest growth, and then the other one bears its fruit on the second year cane. And so for those, you just want to make sure you know which one you have so that you're not accidentally pruning off the growth that's going to be producing your vegetable or your fruits. And on these, it should say like in, let's see. Yes. So that one begins fruiting second year after planting. And so it should say on your growing information, beginning the second year for summer fruiting varieties. And a lot of them, there's a lot of them that are kind of in between this too. So even though they put most of their crop out on second year canes, they might put a little bit out on their first year cane too.
So then you cut them back after the second year, after you do your harvest.
Yes.
And we had raspberries here in Basalt and they spread like crazy.
Yes, yeah, you can, they'll definitely overwinter here, no problem. And they are another one that can really, they can get almost weedy. They can spread a little bit aggressively. So you just want to make sure that you put it in an area where they do have quite a bit of room to spread. Or if you really need to keep them contained, I guess you could try and keep them in a container. I haven't tried to grow raspberries in a container before, but it would probably work fine. The one thing with planting perennials in containers is sometimes that makes them a little bit more susceptible to the cold in the winter since their roots are more exposed. So if you can kind of either put it in a protected place over winter or keep like snow packed up around the container or just insulate that container a little bit, then that will help them overwinter better. Or put, like, I don't know if you've seen those, it's like a little blanket for trees and shrubs. Putting that over it will help as well. Because when they're in containers, they're just a little bit more susceptible to the cold. All right. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so look for ones that, for the vegetables, we're looking for shortest amount of days to harvest. And then looking for things like cold tolerant, reliable, and cool weather, bred for earliness. And I'm just going to show you a couple of seed sites. Botanical interests, they actually have a section on there that just has frost tolerant vegetables. So if you want to just look for things that you know are going to be frost tolerant, then they've got them all in one section. And as you can see, so that's a lot of our cool season veggies. So. And then another one, we've got territorial seeds here. Oh, look. Yeah, and on the saw your reply. On the raspberries in Newcastle, it could be a soil issue. It definitely could be that the soil's either, well, over that way, it tends to be really alkaline. And occasionally there's some salt issues too that you can run into. So getting your soil tested would be a great idea if you're finding that you're still just not having good luck with the raspberries. Getting the soil tested to see if there are any salinity issues or if it's just extremely alkaline. So, nope. No worries. All right. So looking at tomatoes here, these ones, it doesn't have the little quick captions like some of these other sites do. So you have to actually click on it to see what it says about it. So it can take a little bit longer, but like I said, the determinate varieties or semi-determinate generally going to be the best or most reliable here. So you can click on those, and then that would be a way to pare down the amount that you're looking through. So if we want a determinate or semi-determinate slicer, then it'd bring up all the ones that fit into that category. And so then you can kind of look from there, and it pares it down a little bit. And one of the ones, let's see, the New Girl tomato variety, that one's pretty reliable here. So those are good. And the San Marzano, some of the smaller tomato varieties, those do really well too, as well. And the grapes and the cherries are all really good around here. But so that's one way to kind of just start looking through them all, because it can be very, very overwhelming. And then it's just another company on here. So when we're looking through, see, oh, extra early, we know this might be a good variety for our area. Yeah, so another early variety. So generally looking for something like early, first to market. And then other considerations that are good to think about. One, how much space do you have in the garden? Squashes and cucumbers tend to take up a lot of space. So if you don't have that much room, then you might want to skip those ones, unless that's your absolute favorite. And then you can go ahead and plant it and just make sure that you're giving it enough room. So it might be the only thing. If you have like a kind of a standard sort of 10x3 or 10x4 bed, can have about, well, you can maybe squish four smaller varieties of squashes. So those ones that have a more bush type growth habit. But yeah, so space, one thing to be thinking about. And then also for how much space you have when you're thinking about what you want to grow in it, set your priorities. So do you want to plant something that you know is going to be successful? Or maybe you're like, I don't really like any of those vegetables that much. I just want to plant tomatoes, or, whatever it is, or peppers. So set your priorities. What's the most important thing for you to be growing in your garden? Another thing to think about is, will you have the same garden next year? So if you're in like a community garden plot, and you might not necessarily have the same garden plot next year, then you probably don't want to plant perennials. Those you might want to just plant in a container, and then you can bring them in over winter, so you can still save them. Or you could also always plant them in your garden, and then if you want to dig them up at the end of the year and take them with you, you can do that too. So, and then the other thing is that's sometimes good to think about is, how expensive is this vegetable at the grocery store? Like potatoes and onions, they both grow really well around here. They also tend to be really cheap at the grocery store. So maybe that would be one to skip and use for leafy greens, or something or tomatoes, or peppers, or things that are a little bit more expensive. Okay. And then some additional resources here. I've got those in the handout as well. And I think a lot of these are actually on your Basalt Library website as well. So you can find them there. And I just wanted to go to the Grow and Give Colorado site real quick and show you where some of those resources are. And I know that looking at this website on like a mobile phone, it looks really clunky right now. It looks good on a desktop, but we know on the mobile phone it is pretty clunky. So we're working on fixing that so it looks better if you're looking at it from a mobile device. If you go to the general gardening info here, I'll pull that up. So we've got information on Colorado's climate, when to plant, local climate summaries. We'll be talking about this a little bit more next time. Environmental hurdles, site planning and prep, seed starting and seed saving, water, fertilizer, mulch. Basically everything from planning out your garden to harvesting is on here. And then at the bottom, there's also some specific things for mountain gardening. So there's a video about vegetable gardening in the mountains on here if you want to watch that. And then there's 2 info sheets about growing veggies in the mountains. But this website's got a ton of information. And so it's definitely a good one to take a look at if you have any questions about growing veggies. And then there's also specific information on each vegetable crop here. Okay. And they're just listed in alphabetical order. So all kinds of things. And they have, there's a download too that has all of these. It's called the Colorado Vegetable Guide, and you can download that here. And so this also goes through information about all these veggies that were listed here and how to grow them well in Colorado. Yeah, so that's a good website to use. And the Grow and Give program, it was started in 2020 as a response to the pandemic. And it encourages home gardeners or community gardens to donate any extra produce to your local food pantry. So if you want to join that, you can just click join us and sign up. And it's just a pledge that if you have any excess produce throughout the growing season, you'll donate it to a local food bank or hunger relief organization. And you log, so you report your donations throughout the growing season, and that's kind of how you keep track. But yeah, so that's that resource. And then I'd like to open it up to any other questions or comments or.
So Denyse, I have a question. When you're talking about cold weather and warm weather vegetables, you're talking about, could you just go over like soil temperature? What's the breaking point there?
Yep. So on, I'm sorry, that's just going to turn up my volume a little bit. So why does that keep popping up? For the warm season veggies, most of them, it's soil temperatures around like 60 degrees for green beans is ideal. And so most of those, the warm season veggies, you don't want to put out in your garden until about June 1st. And I have on my handout about this. So I have, if you want to start it as a seed or transplant on there, and we'll be talking about that more next week. But a lot of the warm season veggies, you're going to have the best luck if you start them as a transplant and then put those out June 1st or so. And the green beans, you can even do those as a second crop. So like after, let's see, if you planted radish or spinach early in the season, and those things you can plant, pretty much at the beginning of May. And then after you've harvested those, then you can put your green beans in. So you can do green beans either earlier in the season, or if you want to wait and do like a succession planting of them after another crop, you can do that too. And then you don't have to worry about if the soil's warm enough. Another thing you can do is if you put black or clear plastic over your bed, you can heat up the soil a little bit faster that way and get a little bit of a jump on those warm season vegetables. So I do that with my beds that I know I'm going to be planting tomatoes or green beans or peppers in. I put some clear or black plastic over them for, it doesn't need to be that long, a week. And that'll warm up the soil. And so you can kind of get away with planting them a little bit earlier. And it also helps with weed control too. So it can either encourage them to germinate, and then you can go through and weed them all, or if you're leaving it on for kind of a longer time and it's getting pretty hot out, then it'll actually solarize and kill some of those weeds. So it can be a good tool for weed management as well. And then on the cool season veggies, there's a little bit more of a temperature variation there on when you can plant them. And we'll be talking about this a lot in the next 2 weeks about how to know when to either start these inside and when to put them out, or when to plant them just outside in your garden. So I'll show you some resources on how to get start dates for those.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
The library was part of the Grow and Give program last summer, and we had, by the end of September, we were really able to donate quite a bit of fresh produce to the Lift Up food bank down in Carbondale. They would take it once a week. We had obviously we had tons of kale, but we also had tomatoes, we had potatoes, we had beans, and it was a really great way for us to have the community plot and know that the produce was going to be used, even if we weren't able to use it ourselves. It was a great program to participate in.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah,
anybody have any other questions for Denyse for today? She'll be back next Friday at 2 o'clock. And we'll continue planning and prepping for our kitchen garden. We also have a lot of the resources that Denyse mentioned here at the library. We have the printouts, and we can also, if you're having trouble finding it on the website, we can point you in the right direction. Some of the links are on our gardening site, our gardening dropdown. So you can check that out and let us know if you have any questions. And thanks everybody for coming. Denyse, really appreciate you helping us over here in Basalt, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Excited to see you next week.
All right. Take care. Have a good week. Bye.